important for the home care worker to remember that this is a really hard time, and keep that in mind, to be patient and comforting. Um, Families often view home care as their last hope to avoid nursing home placement. So they're putting a lot of hope onto the shoulders of that home care worker. And they may be frail themselves. They may have, very likely have neglected their own health. So, that home care worker may, it may be good for that person to kind of keep track of the family caregiver as well as the older adult. Okay, some other aspects of understanding the family's perspective. They may be mourning the loss of companionship, and how the older adult used to be. They may be in denial regarding dementia. They may feel uncomfortable letting a stranger into the house, and I've touched on that before. It's, who wouldn't be uncomfortable, if you didn't know the person. They may feel guilty relinquishing various caregiving tasks to the home care worker. And they may feel angry and frustrated and take it out on people, including the older adult and the home care worker. They may feel ashamed about dementia-related behaviors. They may feel uncertain or confused about the older adult's condition and what to expect, and here again, the home care worker can kind of help with some of this, because as I said, the home care workers that we talked to specialized in dementia care. So, they had seen dementia manifested in a variety of people and circumstances, so they could kind of put things in perspective. The family may not know what to expect from home care. They may ignore the older adult. On the other hand, they may be overprotective, or they may feel depressed and giving up. It's also important to understand the older adult's perspective. That person may realize that he or she is declining and fears nursing home placement. That's a huge fear. They may have been attached to the previous home care worker and missed that person, and are comparing the new person with the old person. So that, sometimes may be helpful for the home care worker coming in fresh to know, oh, who did this before? And, what were some good things that that person did? That's being a partner in care. The older adult may have had a bad experience with a previous home care worker and is fearful. And again, that's that's information that a family member may want to share with the home care worker, just to keep them alert, like please avoid, like loud noises or whatever. The older adult may be in denial and sees no need for the home care worker's help. The older adult may want to keep a sense of independence and privacy. So, there are plenty of ways that the home care worker can provide care while still, being respectful and encouraging the older adult to do as much as they can on their own. Okay, so, putting the family and the older adult at ease. As I said, family members may feel nervous about letting a stranger into the private space of their home to assist with personal care, and that's certainly understandable. So it's important to build trust on both sides and put each other at ease. So remember the home care workers that I interviewed or had in focus groups realized this. I mean, I'm not just making these things up. These are the things that they told me, about what they needed to know, and also what they did to help family members feel more at ease. They wanted families to know information about them. They wanted families to know how many years of experience they had had in home care, where the home care worker had worked before, what kinds of caregiving experience she has had, why she chose to be a home care worker. And the home care workers that we talked to wanted to share lists of references. So, when you're interviewing, a home care worker to decide, who to let into your home, these may be some kinds of questions that you may want to ask, but just anything that supports the ability of the home care worker. That's what the home care worker wanted to get across to family members. Okay, and then it's also important to remember the home care worker may feel a bit ill at ease too. She may feel nervous, not knowing what she's walking into. She doesn't know, is this person with dementia, like really, really quiet? Is it aggressive, engage in disruptive behaviors, not knowing whatever. And one thing that the home care workers said was a big problem that they often encountered was with family conflict. If there's more than one family member involved in care, there probably is more than one perspective on how to give that care. And often families just disagree on what should be done. And the home care workers that we spoke with, just really dreaded getting caught in the middle of those kinds of conflicts. So one way to avoid that is to identify a family point person who will represent the family's wishes or desires so that home care worker knows whom to follow when decisions conflict. So that's really important to remember. Some home care workers met with family members before meeting with the older adult, to get some pointers on preferences and what to avoid. And, I encourage you, I think that's a really good idea. There was one family member, caregiver, who's in one of the focus groups, told the story of how he went to Mexico, and found someone he thought would be the perfect caregiver, brought her back to the United States. But he knew the kinds of things that his mother approved of and didn't. And he knew what represented appropriate apparel to his mother. So he bought this woman, this home care worker, a whole new wardrobe so that she would kind of meet the ideals of the mother, at least get along better, make that good first impression. So sometimes family members really went out of their way to help home care workers, establish rapport with that older adult. And again, that's very important. If the home care workers with an agency, of course, they should learn details of the care plan. Well, okay, sorry. Okay, then it's really important to identify the older adult's needs and special requests. So these are the kinds of things that you may want to convey to the home care worker. What specific problems prompted seeking home care? Was it disruptive behavior? Was it wandering? The older adult kind of shut down and stop eating? What are the problems that the home care worker can help with? What activities does the older adult have difficulty doing on his or her own? And that's important to identify, because if they can do something on their own, then of course they should be encouraged to do so. Define schedules. When is the best time for the home care worker to come and how often? Identify special requests. Sometimes people have really specific requests about their home. They want to keep a kosher kitchen, for example. So those are important things to find out. And then also agree on policies, like smoking, no smoking, or when they can eat on the job, or can they use the phone while they're working? What about meal preparation? What's entailed in that? And using household supplies. We'll get back to that later, but that's often a area of contention. Okay, and then it's important to define the boundaries of the home care worker's role, and identify what types of help the family and the older adult does not want from the home care worker. Um, and I can speak from experience here. I mean, like some of this is from personal experience mostly with my mother. Um, we had a home care worker who, I think there were cultural differences in what represented appropriate care. So she really thought that my mother should be babied, pampered. She's done all this hard work all her life, and now it's time for her to rest. And so the home care worker was doing everything for her, including feeding her, unbeknownst to us, until we went to lunch, in a public place. And this home care worker started feeding my mother. And I mean, it was just like, my husband's in gerontology also, and he knows it's the last thing you want to do, is just make people more dependent. So we were concerned about that. So that was one thing that we didn't want the home care worker to do. You should identify types of care that family members want to continue to provide. Sometimes it's really important for a family member, to transfer the older adult to bed. They may have a ritual around that, so, help them to continue that, or doing aspects of personal care, like some aspects of grooming, for example. Identify types of care that the older adult may feel uncomfortable receiving and how to make that more acceptable. And that's usually the more personal kinds of care. We talked about bathing, and how to be respectful and, try to do those kinds of caregiving tasks in a comforting and loving way. And then also learn how many home care workers will be working with the older adult and how to coordinate care. And sometimes home care workers, have a pretty extensive network of home care workers, and they exchange suggestions and information and so on. So, and they rely on each other to substitute. So that's something to just keep in mind, that that's a possible resource out there. Okay, defining the home care worker role continued. What is the plan for substitutes? And this is a big issue. If a home care worker cannot come, how much notice would be required? And will the home care worker be responsible for finding a substitute? And that's really, really hard on the family and the older adult. If there's a lapse in care, that's really, you need to work out a plan for that. And sometimes families have unrealistic or uninformed expectations, and the home care worker may need to clarify responsibilities. For example, there's some things that they just cannot do. Legally, they cannot give medications, but a home health worker could do that. The home care worker can cue, like, oh, it's time for you to take your meds, but they can't actually give them. Okay, then negotiating the care plan. If you have an agency, you've developed that care plan, but if you don't, you need to get together with that home care worker and define what is needed and expected by the older adult and by the family as concretely as possible. And this is really important in building that partnership in care. Each side needs to know what is expected and how those tasks are expected to be accomplished. In negotiating this care plan, there's certainly a potential for information overload. Both the home care worker and the family should take notes during this meeting. And then at the end, someone should write up a written copy of the care plan and, be sure that everyone has that. Okay, what represents a good home care worker? And this is what families told us and what the home care workers themselves told us. They help to maintain personhood. We mentioned that before about how it's really important. It goes beyond custodial care. There's a lot of, psychological interactions, social interactions that are very important. So that home care worker shows respect for the older adults, makes the older adult that their needs his or her top priority. The good home care worker understands dementia and that it does not change the older adult's worth as a person, and that's very important. Helps the older adult maintain a good appearance and a sense of dignity, recognizes that the older adult has a personal history and meaningful life. Sometimes, when people meet, a very fragile, frail older adult at the end of, in late life, they just see that person in that particular moment. But it's important to remember they have this huge history, life history, that is fascinating, and they're probably willing to share that eventually. The good home care worker avoids belittling or hurting the older adult's feelings, and she interacts with the older adult as she would with anyone else. So joins in conversations, jokes and laughs with the person, shows that he or she likes and cares about the older adult. Okay, again, what makes a good home care worker in terms of basic personal care? Certainly they make sure that the older adult's basic needs are met. The home care worker is consistent and thorough, but still patient and gentle when assisting with personal care. And cleans up after that care, cleans up the kitchen after making meals, or cleans up the bathroom after giving the older adult her bath. The good home care worker knows how to operate the various appliances in the home, and she understands the importance of continuity of care for persons with dementia and the implications for the older adult and the family if the home care worker frequently cancels. So we touched on that a little before. It's really important to be consistent in care. Okay. Again, the good home care worker is a positive team player. She's positive about her work and she takes pride in it and recognizes that it's very important. Maintains a pleasant attitude and neat appearance. She keeps family informed about the older adult and shares suggestions for his or her care. She promptly alerts the family if she notices potential problems developing. She respects the privacy and personal belongings of the older adult and other occupants in that house, and identifies what areas are off limits. And she shows understanding but not pity for what the older adult and families are experiencing. I want to underscore that part about taking pride in the work. The home care workers that we spoke with really were proud of what they did, and they felt that not everyone could do that kind of work, that it takes a special person, and it was really important to them personally to provide quality care. Okay, so now we're at the question point. Are there any questions?
Yes, ma'am, there are.
Okay, great.
Yeah, okay, the first question is, will long-term care insurance cover non-agency workers? Do you know?
Oh, gee. It depends on the kind of, I'm sorry, I can look that up, but I don't want to give you misinformation. Different insurance policies cover different things. But usually, it's been my experience that usually you pay out of pocket, but it's much less than what you would pay a home care agency.
One thing I might say is that if they are certified or licensed, they don't not necessarily working for an agency, they might be, but generally speaking, I don't think so. Rick, did you have something to say?
I don't want to butt in, but from my in-home care, I was manager of in-home care for several years. Long-term health insurance covers in-home care. Other insurances do not. It's just something to look into, and there's different types of long-term health insurance as well. So you want to really be careful about that. But otherwise it's not currently, but there's a lot of stuff that we're working on legislatively to try to get things covered around that. So,
Yeah.
and I won't go further. I'll let the doctor cover those things.
Okay, and Peggy, we also have the Kapuna Caregiver Program and the Kapuna Care Program that helps pay for home care workers as well. I'm not sure if they have to be a part of an agency or not, though.
Oh, I don't know.
I'm not sure, but you have to be working 30 hours a week to qualify for that. And then there's a limit to the amount of what you receive from that.
Yeah, I think it's $210 a week.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, the next question is, what is the average cost for an agency or non-agency home care worker? Rick, you can probably help on this one.
Yeah, please, Rick, help here.
Okay. So the range here in Hawaii is anywhere from, so there's two different kinds. I don't know if you covered this already here, but there's personal care, and then there's the home care, which is there's companion care and personal care. So companion care is more being in there helping with meals, the ADLs, those kinds of things, but it's hands off. So you're not bathing, you're not toileting. The personal care, it's all of the companion care stuff, but then in addition, it's hands-on. That's the showering and helping with toileting and those kinds of things. So the range tends to be, so for companion care, it's less. So the range is like $25 to $31 an hour for companion care. You should note that most agencies, really all agencies, 4 hours is the minimum that they'll send a staff person out there. That's because it's just not worth the person arranging for daycare for their kids and driving and getting there and doing anything less than 4 hours. So 4 hours is the minimum. If it's personal care, then the range jumps up a little bit higher. $37 to $41 is the current range. And what I always say is, you really do get what you pay for, unless you really get lucky and get a really good caregiver. So you really have to budget around that. Yeah.
All right, thanks. Oh, go ahead.
Well, most agencies don't do live-in kind of care. There are people that do that, but so what we would do when I was doing this is 12 hours would be the max that we'd have somebody do a shift if it was 24-hour care, which people do need. And then we'd just have a couple people work it, sometimes 3 8-hour shifts.
Okay, is doing the laundry a normal job item for the home care worker, or is that negotiated, Peggy?
I would say it's negotiated, and I will get to that a little bit more in the second half, but that sometimes is parts of conflict. But yeah, you can negotiate what you want from, if you're, especially if you're working with a non-agency person, just tell them, this is what needs to be done. Are you willing to do it or not?
Okay. All right, and Yvonne asked for a list of the home care workers agencies in Oahu. On that list of sponsors that I sent you and that I showed the slides for at the beginning of the program, there are a few of those listed there, and those are the ones that I'm familiar with that are excellent companies. So if you aren't satisfied with those, let me know and I can find some more for you. Okay, another agencies. Okay, what is the cost? Oh, we were talking about the cost per hour for a home care worker. Okay, my long-term policy pays family member who provides care as long as the family member is licensed, like maybe a CNA or an LPN. Are you familiar with that, Peggy?
I think, to me, that's the optimal thing. If we could arrange the system so that family caregivers could be paid for the care that they give. And we do have a program, but it's not available. It's available on the other islands. It's not available as in Oahu, at least yet, where, family members can provide care, and money is designated to an agency that then gives the money to the family members. So the money isn't given directly. I am blanking. It's comes by a number of different terms, but care and counseling is one term for it. We have another term here, and I'm always blanking on it. But that, that's available, I think, for people who qualify for Medicaid. If the family member has some kind of certification, I don't know, maybe Rick or Kathy can help here. You would think that they would be able to be paid.
Well, I remember talking about some of it during the legislation, but I can't remember if there was ever an outcome.
Well, it's really, it's really defined by what's actually ordered, but what's covered, sadly, is not much. So your home health stuff is covered by the Medicaid, Medicare, but with home health, they're going to set their schedule around their schedule, not your schedule, and it's not home care. It's just doing the nursing kinds of things that are needed that a caregiver can't do. Caregivers, sadly, they're very low paid. It's not really covered. I'm going to jump ahead. There's a question about liability. Agencies carry liability. Individuals oftentimes do not. So you got to be really careful about what you're hiring and who you're hiring. Oftentimes it works out great to have a private person, but when something goes wrong, they just don't have the backing that an agency has. But then sadly with an agency, you end up paying a little bit more. There's an awful lot of under the table stuff going on here where people are being paid to do in-home care, and it's wonderful, but then they run into trouble with taxes and things like that when things are found out. So it's there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on. That what needs to happen really is just what Kathy started to say. We keep talking about it legislatively. This is an area that needs to be covered a lot better. I mean,
Yeah.
It really does need to be. And like
Yeah.
the doctor's been pointing out here, our numbers are growing huge. Our elders all of us are going to need this care. And so we're hopeful that we can, not to politicize, but we're really hopeful that we can get this covered in the future. So that's, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement. Yeah, we really need to address this, politically as well as,
Yeah.
care workers.
Okay. Renee has shared that her mother's long-term care policy with Genworth pays for care from friends or neighbors, but not family members. Caregivers do not need to be licensed for her particular policy. It depends on the policy. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, next question is, are all healthcare workers educated in dementia care? I have an answer, but go ahead, Margaret.
Well, for this project, we specifically looked for home care workers who were knowledgeable in dementia care, and that was their area of expertise.
Okay.
So, no, not all home care workers are knowledgeable.
Okay, so from my experience, long-term care insurance must go through a licensed agency, but there are some long-term care insurances that when needed will give a sum of money that can be used in any way needed for the care of the person in need. That's another person.
Oh, okay.
Okay, all right. So another question, if you hire a non-agency healthcare worker, home care worker, and something goes wrong, okay, you already answered that, Rick. You skipped ahead here. Okay.
I did. But let me add a long-term health insurance. A lot of them have a cap on it. So if you start early, we've had people, when I was working with folks, their long-term insurance ran out because they used up all the money. So you really want to work with your agent to make sure you understand, what you have there also. So. Yeah.
Okay, Christy asks, is the state currently addressing the cost of care and the rather restrictive Department of Labor laws? The DOL laws add about 35% more to the cost of care of a private home care worker. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not, no.
I hadn't heard that.
Rick, are you?
Well, I'm not, but sadly, the care worker isn't covered by a lot of the stuff that's generally out there for labor laws and things like that. And I don't want to get into it all, but some of these folks, so I'm going to tell you, honestly, what happens is because it is so low paying, when I was doing it in our agency, they were working for 2 or 3 different agencies, and they were putting in a lot of hours. And it's just what they did. I mean, we've even paid people for, if they were working for us, they get overtime. Now, some states have that if you're working for so Massachusetts, I know the Boston office, the owners of an agency there, If they're working for 2 or 3 different agencies, it's when their total number of hours hit 40 hours in a week, all the agencies have to pay the overtime, but that's not the case here in Hawaii. And so it's convoluted. I mean, it's the caregiver. I mean, these are angels. These are really angels, and their hearts are really in the work that they're doing. I haven't met anybody that didn't have compassion. Compassion can't be taught. So they work around the clock, and then some of them go home and take care of their own kapuna on top of all of this, and their kids, right? So, but the labor laws, we need to probably improve that for them as well here, in addition to the pay, in addition to the coverage. I mean, there's just so much we need to do in this field.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rick.
Yeah.
Okay, Nurse Mary tells us that Hawaii Medicaid has a non-skilled hands-off care program called HCBS, which is arranged through a Medicaid caseworker, if anybody didn't know that.
Okay.
Next question, do we need insurance when we have a home health care worker, whether okay, we've already answered that, I think, whether non-agency or agency? Do we need insurance? You don't have to have insurance, you can pay out of pocket, yeah?
Yeah, you're paying out of pocket. You don't need insurance. Yeah.
Okay, is there an optimal time to consider a home care worker, for instance, symptoms of the elder, family caregiver, burnout, skills, etc.?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you want to avoid burnout. So definitely before that starts kicking in. Different people have different points where they, just can't keep going on and need outside help. So it's up to the individual, and what are they comfortable with? But, eventually if it's chronic care and it's pretty intense care, eventually people are going to need home care. So they need to recognize that. They need to start looking around at what the options are, and as I recommended, perhaps start with a home care agency, but I mean, they are so expensive. I mean, we just couldn't do it. And my mother had, a substantial financial situation, but we still couldn't afford home care from an agency. So, try to anticipate what are the needs, so you're ready to get that home care worker when you want. And as I mentioned before, most people start home care when a crisis occurs, like after hospitalization. And that's not really the optimal time. But maybe before the hospitalization, the home care worker wasn't needed. So it's really an individual situation. And you need to think through all the different points and just prepare yourself as well as possible, so you can step into a partnership of care when the time comes.
If I could interject, for those of you that listened to Dr. Balaz's presentation, caregiver burnout is a serious issue.
Yeah.
And you don't want to get to that point.
Absolutely.
So if you don't hire a home care worker or whatever, establish a network of friends and family that can help you get some respite so that you don't burn out and end up in the hospital yourself.
Absolutely, yeah. And that is such an important point. Often you see that the kids, become more frail than the person that they're caring for, and maybe even pass away before the person they're caring for, because they just neglect themselves and are totally focused on providing care. So it's important to have backup. It's important to have supportive networks. Identify the help that's available, like through the Alzheimer's Association too. They have all sorts of resources.
Right.
Okay, and if I would say one more thing, and before I let you have it back, Peggy, because I don't want to run out of time for you. I met Rick when one of my clients, it was having an issue with her husband that had advanced dementia. He was staying up all night and eating everything in the house in one night, and it was getting crazy. So I told her, I said, if you want to find a healthcare worker to help you, I will be there with you to interview the company and the caregivers. So I'm a huge advocate for caregivers. So if you get in a situation where you need to start interviewing and you need some help, please call me anytime, okay? All right.
What a great resource. Wow, that is wonderful.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I've been, I mean, hospitalizations, home care workers, I want to be there for you because you can get in a mess if you don't know what to expect. Okay,
Absolutely.
Peggy, go ahead and finish your talk.
Yeah, well, I'll try not to go over time, but I think it's
No,
inevitable.
don't worry about it. Just do what you need to do.
Okay. All right. So, in being partners in care, here are some things that families can tell the home care worker. First of all, just in terms of pretty obvious medical kinds of information, the important aspects of the medical history. And, it's up to you how much you want to divulge, but that home care worker, if the older adult is diabetic, I mean, the home care worker really should have that information. Any kind of medical history that might prompt some kind of critical situation if not taken care of. They should be given important phone numbers. They should be told what to do in an emergency, whom to contact. They need to know the medications and the schedule for taking them. As I said, they can't really dispense meds, but they can cue the person to take them. They need to know the dietary requirements and what are the restrictions, what the older adult cannot have. And they need to know any kind of allergies, food or drug. Okay, more health-related information. They need to know what kinds of therapies that the older adult receives, like PT or OT or speech, and maybe even, possibly being able to reinforce some of those therapies, simple exercises, for example. They need to know about exercise. What is the older adult's level of endurance? What is permissible, what's going to put them in danger if they exercise too vehemently. They also need to know, how the older adult communicates with others, what kinds of signals that person gives out. What are the signals that indicate he or she is in pain? And I remember very vividly an interview, this was with another project, with a man who was the caregiver for his wife who had dementia. And he recognized that she would get really agitated whenever she was in pain. And so whenever he took her out, which he did often, he would give her aspirin, just in anticipation of that agitation. You should also know the home care worker should know the preferences regarding home care. And I touched on this before, including attitudes toward fostering independence or dependence. And some families have different attitudes toward this, but as I said, for our family, we really valued independence as long as possible and tried to minimize anything that would encourage dependence. And the home care worker should know what are the activities of daily living that the older adult can do alone, and that's very important, to avoid that dependency and also to give the older adult a sense of privacy and respect. Okay, other things that you can tell the home care worker that will help that worker relate to the older adult, aspects of that person's history. Knowing the older adult's background, their history, their preferences, really helps conversations, developing rapport between the home care worker and the older adult, and also treating the older adult as a unique person. So they get an appreciation of the life history, what the older adult has accomplished or been through, just, oh, you served in World War II. Wow, tell me about it. That's quite a contribution to the world, that kind of thing. Find out what motivates the older adult, and who are the people who can influence him or her, and this can work really well if you're trying to get somebody, to do something like eat, like, oh, your daughter would be so happy if you ate this, goulash or whatever, but just, what works with that particular individual. What motivates them? Oh, if you, do this, then we can go outside for a little bit, that kind of thing. Okay, it's good to know the religious or spiritual preferences, and sometimes home care workers, pray with the older adult. So that's another meaningful activity that one can engage in with that person. They should know a little bit about the personality. I mean, eventually they'll find out, but, is the older adult typically quiet? Are they gregarious? Are they easy to upset? Those are things that really helps that the home care worker make that good first impression, knowing what to anticipate and how to act accordingly. They should know the pet peeves of the older adult and ideas regarding appropriate behavior. I mentioned before that this was the one son who knew his mother had very strict ideas about what people should wear at work, and he acted accordingly. And then the home care worker should know the habits and routines of the older adult so that they can maintain those as well as possible. And really, older adults, and this is, I don't want to stereotype this, but habits and routines are so important, for older adults in general, but especially for persons with dementia, because, if you can just get through your day in just doing your routine and not having to think through every single step, that makes life a lot easier. So you don't want to disrupt those routines if at all possible. And I'm seeing that I'm getting a low battery here, so I may need to move my computer pretty soon. The home care worker needs to know the triggers, what triggers disruptive behaviors and how to deal with it. So what upsets the older adult? What typically precedes or triggers those challenging behaviors? What are the best ways for dealing with challenging behaviors? Anyone who is a dementia caregiver probably has worked out some of this, like redirecting them towards something or whatever works for that particular older adult. It's very helpful if you can tell the home care worker that kind of information. What cues work best and what are necessary to orient the older adults? Cues just like, it's time to wash our hands and then turn on the water or something, just what is needed for that particular individual. And then any special phrases or behaviors that may signal a need. So, that person may, start, excuse me here, I'm like taking care of my power supply here. Oh.
While you're doing that, Peggy, I wanted to say, one of my favorite stories talking about what triggers certain behaviors. It's a story about this woman who was taking care of her mother with dementia. And every afternoon at 4 o'clock, her mother would just get so frantic at 4 o'clock. And she says, I've got to go home. I've got to go home. I've got to go home. So for a long time, the daughter said, Mom, you are home. You are home. Finally, she remembered, or she thought about, her mother had been a teacher for 100 years. So at 4 o'clock was quitting time and she was supposed to go home at 4 o'clock. So what the daughter did to take care of the behavior was she would put her mom in the car at 4 o'clock and drive around the block and come home. And when she got home, she was perfectly fine because she got home from work. So that kind of thing, if you look at triggers, little triggers like that, it can lead back to what was going on the rest of their life.
Absolutely. That's a perfect example, and that's really the kind of information that's so important to share with that home care worker. This is what works. This is why this person is getting upset. A lot of times people have sundowning, at certain times of the day, at the end of the day, get more agitated, So, I mean, if the home care worker specializes in dementia, they would know this anyway. Okay, what can they tell about preferences? What families can tell about preferences? You know, what the older adult likes to eat, what they like in terms of entertainment and activities, favorite topics of conversation. You know, we always would tell our home care workers, oh, my mother loves the Cardinals, the baseball team, you know, and it was interesting because she wasn't into baseball until very late in life. And then she became this huge expert. She knew all the players and could discuss all the pitching strategies and the managing strategy. I mean, she really took it on. So, you know, that could entertain her for a long time if the home care worker would talk about baseball. Preferences regarding the home environment. And sometimes, as I said, people have routines, people have habits that, you know, have very specific ideas about how the home should be. And just to give an example of my mother, she was really particular. I mean, she spent most of her time, you know, in the family room, which, you know, had windows like on three sides of the room. And she was very particular about the curtains, you know, and like at what time of the day they had to be pulled and at what certain point they had to be pulled. I mean, she really would wait until I got it exactly right, you know. So, you know, some people have really exquisitely detailed ideas about how they want their physical environment to be, and that's helpful for the home care worker to know. Favorite possessions, you know, you might, you know, talk about those, and they often trigger like past memories, past experiences. Pets, people love to talk about their pets. And then what the home care worker can tell families. You know, they can clarify the role of the home care worker if family has never used it before. And they can instruct in terms of technical kinds of things, how to safely transfer or reposition an older adult. You know, what are some simple exercises to do? But also, and you might not think of this, but they can help to put things in perspective, you know, and what to expect with dementia. If you have a home care worker who specializes with dementia, you know, they can kind of anticipate, they know what that trajectory often entails, you know, and they can just kind of alert the family to what to expect. They can share techniques or strategies that worked when caring for other clients. They can give supportive feedback. You know, often the families really, really need that, you know, and encouragement about their own care, caregiving. You know, a lot of this is new to family members, and you know, they're just kind of struggling, and it's extremely helpful to know, oh yeah, you're doing it exactly right. You know, keep up the good work. Or, oh, if you just did another thing, then that would be perfect. Give feedback on the older adults' abilities. And sometimes people with dementia may act differently with different people. You see this a lot in nursing homes. You know, when the family comes to visit, the resident, you know, acts really helpless and like, oh, I can't do this, can't do this. You know, and the staff knows, yes, she can do that. So it just depends on the personality of the person with dementia, but just keep that in mind that sometimes it depends on the audience, you know, what abilities are shown or not shown. Okay, and then if new to the situation, I think I mentioned this before, the home care worker may notice things that the family hadn't realized, you know, such as safety issues. You know, there may be carpeting that may trip the person or whatever, you know. So sometimes it's really helpful to have a stranger come into your environment and give you a bit of feedback. Okay, how to develop a system of communication. And it's really important to clarify assumptions regarding care. And, you know, as I kind of alluded to earlier, you know, our assumptions for care for my mother were very different than that home care workers who fed her. So some families want the home care worker to take charge. Others may be more controlling and they want things done a certain way according to their way. So, you know, all of this, the more clarity that you get, that you can achieve in terms of what the expectations are, the more likely you're going to have a good partnership. Develop a system to regularly update each other regarding the older adult's emotional and physical condition. And so that may mean meeting at the beginning of the shift to review the current situation or any problems that had occurred, or meeting at the end of the shift to review what happened, you know, and what may need to be done. Okay. When the family and the home care worker cannot meet face to face, you know, there's still ways to communicate. Families can leave notes or text instructions of what to do that day. The home care worker can fill out a daily log or journal to inform the family what happened. If that's too tedious, you can develop a checklist of tasks completed. Okay, she ate all of her lunch, half of her lunch, none of her lunch. We had a successful bath. She exercised and walked around the block once, that kind of thing. You know, just tasks that you would hope were completed on a given day that you could just check off. And then also a list of problems that are possibly encountered, you know, in the daily log. Okay, she didn't sleep very well. She didn't take a nap, or she slept most of the day. She seemed a little bit wobbly when she was walking, those kinds of things. You can use a tape recorder to exchange information. It's just really, really important to keep lines of communication open and just regard yourself as partners. You know, you're helping each other maintain or achieve this optimal level of care. Try to address problems and concerns as a team. Okay, common problems and how to manage. That home care workers should never ask for money or a loan. And expensive gifts are inappropriate. You know, so you might want to give, you know, small tokens of appreciation, you know, and that is welcome, you know, like maybe a gift certificate to a restaurant, that kind of thing. The home care workers should never impose their own medical beliefs, especially if they conflict with the family's health beliefs or the physician's instructions. You know, sometimes people are really into complementary medicine and herbal things, and you know, they really need, in terms of following the lead, here's where the family and the doctor take the lead on this. You know, the medical kinds of things are not to be dealt with or modified by the home care worker. The home care worker should never leave the house before the shift is over, or before you know, the substitute person comes in. There's a common complaint that the home care workers watch TV or sleep all the time. So sometimes it's helpful just to have a list of small little tasks, you know, so that, you know, because it's a long day, you know, and, you know, if they have something useful to do, that helps. Sleeping on the job is not acceptable, especially if the older adult requires constant oversight. Dealing with conflict, any behavior that threatens the older adult's safety or health is not acceptable. And often there are misunderstandings, you know, identifying problems. If you, any kind of partnership, there's always going to be some degree of conflict. So try to work out those misunderstandings. And the home care workers that we spoke to, one of the misunderstandings that came up most frequently was with laundry detergent. You know, and the family would accuse the home care workers of misusing supplies, especially laundry detergent. I don't know if they thought that they were sneaking laundry detergent out of the house or what, but, you know, just like an excessive amount of laundry detergent was being used, you know, and then the home care workers countered, well, but the families don't realize the older adult's incontinent, you know, and we have to do a lot more laundry than perhaps was necessary in the past. So, you know, just try to describe and identify any problem clearly and in an unbiased way, you know, as you would try to work out any kind of problem. Avoiding job stress and burnout. Both the family and the home care worker should recognize that this job is demanding and stressful. We all know that. And both sides of that partnership should emphasize the rewarding aspects of the job. As I said before, the most successful home care workers, you know, had great pride and respect for their work. I mean, this is a literal quote. It's a gift. It takes a special person to do this. Not everybody can, you know, so they really valued what they were accomplishing in their work. But they should try to keep the job separate from the rest of life, you know, and I think it was mentioned even in the question session, oftentimes that home care worker, you know, is working so hard on the job and then goes home and has to be a home care worker to, you know, other members of her own family. So keep that in mind, that the home care worker may be dealing with issues outside of the job. That's frequently the case. So it's important to recognize limits, what's realistic to expect. You know, the family may shut down. This is really hard for the families too. The home care worker should be supportive, but they may just need eventually to accept that, you know, if a family gives up, you know, try as best you can to help them through, but, you know, you got to keep doing your own work. And the home care worker, of course, needs to keep helping the older adult. Recognize that a long-term relationship with the older adult may be emotionally difficult for the home care worker. You know, that the home care worker may become attached, you know, and very difficult for that person to see the older adult decline. We often don't think of that. You know, we think, oh, this is so hard on the family members, which of course it is, but it's hard on the home care workers too. You know, they're going through this, and you know, it's just something to keep in mind. And then watch for signs of burnout. You know, I mean, just signs like if the home care worker is late for work or impatient or careless or kind of dreads coming to work. At that point, you know, the home care worker may need some respite to get back on top of things. Okay, so maintaining that partnership in care, it's not just a one-time shot. You know, you don't just establish it and that's it. You need to continue to foster positive relationships beyond that initial period of establishing guidelines and rapport. And it's an ongoing process. So, and, oh, I forgot. This research project ended up in a little pamphlet, and it's available, you know, online, you know, if you, you know, go to that link. So I was really grateful to AARP that they put that together, and they actually translated it into Spanish as well. So with that, I end the slideshow.
Okay, well, we have more questions.
Oh, great.
Okay. Earlier, somebody had asked a question about liability insurance, and she said that she didn't really ask the question correctly. She says, do we need to revise homeowners insurance when we hire a home care worker?
Yeah, I thought that was maybe the question. You know, I'm sorry, the financial kinds of things are not my forte. So Kathy or Rick, you may be better able to answer this.
I haven't heard of folks actually doing that, but I'm 45 years in mental health, and what I've learned is that if somebody has money and something happens to somebody and they decide to sue them, lawyers oftentimes recommend that they go after the money. So not to scare anybody, but you might just talk to your insurance. I don't think any of the three of us have ever heard of this coming up, but you brought the question up. So you might have a concern about that. It's worth talking to your insurance agents. We can't really advise you on that, but I do know that they go after the deep pockets. That's why people sue the state instead of the individual when things happen. If it's a worker, my agency, if one of my clinicians did something, they wouldn't go after the clinician, they'd go after the agency. But so there you have it. There's a lot of lawyers out there with a lot of advice. So,
All right. David asks, should a home care worker always be a licensed CNA or LPN?
so if you want, I could answer. The state law is that they do need to have completed the CNA program, which, by the way, Kathy trains them for this. They don't have to have completed the test currently, but they do need to, if they're going to do personal care, which is hands-on, they need to be trained as a CNA. They need to have completed and have documentation of that. That's the current state law here in Hawaii. But for your own, so when I was doing this work with our agency, there were frequently families that would request only a CNA, that they had to have a CNA in order to be in the home. And a lot of those would be folks like Kathy, or maybe even myself, who had been in the field a long time, and we just wanted to know that they were qualified. So two ways of answering that. If they're just doing personal care, it's not a requirement. But like Peggy mentioned here, is you want to make sure that they are familiar with what they're working with. So for instance, we were doing a lot of hospice care, and I would never send a CNA that's never done hospice into a hospice situation unless we had done some training, they felt comfortable with it, they understood what they were getting into. And one personal case was when the family decided it was time, and it was time, our caregiver that was in there had a really, really hard time with it. I had to walk her through the process, and we eventually just got somebody to come in that was more comfortable to relieve her. And the same with dementia, if you haven't worked with dementia, you really don't know what you're in for there. And I always say, if you've met 100 people with dementia, you've met 100 different people, but the basic dementia stuff, you gotta be familiar with that to really work with it.
Peggy, do you want to add anything to that?
No.
Okay. Yeah, if they're just companions, they don't have to be certified. But for hands-on stuff, they should be. Okay, the next question is, what is considered an appropriate amount as a token of appreciation?
I thought that question would come up.
Well, a lot of agencies won't allow you to give anything that has monetary value. So our agency did not. And in mental health, we were not allowed to do that. And I'll give you one story. So one of our clinicians who was a CNA, very seasoned, remarkable worker, she left a condo that she was working with someone, got to her car, went to grab her keys, and found this really expensive box of dark chocolate, pineapple covered candies in it. And she called me right away and said, "Oh my God, they won't let me back in. I want to give it back to them. They won't let me." I said, well, just let it go, let it go. Well, her husband then the very next morning at work had a really serious accident and ended up in the hospital. And so she couldn't make her shift. And the family that had gave her this chocolates then was like, "What do you mean you can't come? We gave you chocolates and everything. You need to be here right now." So there's expectations that come with gifts sometimes. You can't predict when that's going to happen. What I used to do with gifts when I worked at an agency or in a group care kind of situations, if somebody, we're going into the holidays and people would bring these huge fruit baskets for me. Well, what I would do is I would incorporate that into the agency. That would be for everybody that was there then, not just for me. Then I felt okay with it. But you want to check with whoever you're working with as to whether gifts are okay or not. And if it's okay, then, you know, within means, but I never felt comfortable with it myself as a clinician.
Okay, the next question. I'm sorry, but could you tell me what the author of the book is on nurturing a family partnership again?
Oh, I'm the author. So
Yeah.
Margaret A. Perkinson. It's Perkinson.
There you go. Thank you. Okay. I'm introducing a companion caretaker to my dad 2 days a week, 4 hours each day. Will slowly increasing this be confusing for them, or how do you recommend something like this to be started? What about multiple companions? And sorry, okay, that's right. But what about multiple companions? Rick.
So
Go ahead. I mean, sometimes it's confusing to have multiple companions, but you know, you have to go with what is needed. I mean, sometimes one person is just not enough. So as long as those home care workers are in communication with each other. They have to be partners in care too, and share some of the same assumptions and attitudes and, the same background information so that the care that they're giving, doesn't really, that it meshes with each other rather than conflicts.
We would oftentimes, yeah, I was muted. I was saying we always had a familiar person be there for the introduction, and quite often, especially with the personal care, more intricate kind of things, we would have a person that had been the caregiver that was working with him do a shift, do like an hour or 2 hours with the new person to go over the shift. We had one lady that was really resistant to having caregivers. In fact, we couldn't even wear our scrubs. We were visitors in her mind. She had dementia, early onset dementia, and she liked to walk. And so it was a perfect setup. So I'd have the new person come, and when she would say, who's she? Oh, she's going to join you guys on the walk today. And then the person that had been there. And by the end of the walk, she was loving them and say, hey, can they come back to visit more often? Sure, we'll have them come back more. But sometimes it's the family that does that also. Again, because the routine is so important. So to have someone there that can guide the person through that routine is really key. And then the other, you were talking earlier, we always kept notes and a notebook of our daily logs, but also a communication log between the family and the caregiver. So if the person had raced off to work or had to leave and didn't have time to update someone, all you had to do is read the notes and you kind of understood already what had happened or hadn't happened, or mom's having a hard time with this and this, see if you can help her with that, but don't push it, it's the communication's everything. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And just to reiterate some of the things that I had touched on before, sometimes family members meet with the caregiver before introducing them to the older adult, just to prep them for what to expect, and what kinds of things they like, what kinds of things they don't like, what are good things to talk about, how you want to help that home care worker as much as you can to develop rapport with the older adults. So any way you can prepare the person for that is great. And some home care workers wanted the family members to accompany them, through a day or at least a part of the day of their work. And, it was partially, for the older adult to feel more at ease, but also for the family to understand what the home care worker is doing. So it surprised me how many home care workers wanted that.
Yeah, it's really important for the family and the caregivers all to kind of be on the same page. So it should all be open communication and everybody helping each other.
Yeah. Thank you, Rick. Okay, from Emmy, one of our sponsors is Elder Care 808. Emmy is the consultant for that company. So she says to resolve conflict between family members and home care workers, it's good to have a neutral third party to facilitate a meeting. And she can be assistance with that. So on your sponsorship sheet, Elder Care 808 is a good resource. Okay, Ben says, going back to the question about liability insurance, he says checking with homeowner insurance is a very good idea. If for no other reason that you are having someone enter your premises, you may be able to add a different rider for possible claims. Okay. And David said, do you have suggestions for my brother who gets scam calls and has given out large amounts of money? What can we do about this? Does your brother have dementia? I'm assuming what the deal is. Margaret.
Wow. Sometimes, families instruct older adults just don't answer the phone because more likely than not, it is a scam call or just a auto voice kind of thing. But recently I heard of someone making a recommendation, Rick, it might have been in the recent PABIA meeting, where they were talking about having a calling service where there's a service that kind of screens through calls. Is anyone familiar with that?
No, but I know that the family should be doing that. I know it sounds intrusive, but my mom will print everything that she does out. And a couple of years ago, my sister called and said she had this whole stack and was getting ready to send money to somebody in Africa that was in trouble. You know, I mean, it's like you hear it all the time, but and I was hearing it all the time too. But that was my first personal experience with it. It's like, oh my gosh, my mom's still a sucker for that. So we have to always be looking and checking, you know, the history. Look at her emails. My brother, what we did is she had a hard time keeping her email stuff working on her Facebook page, and so my youngest brother actually just made himself kind of a partner around that, and he watches it from where he's at, and not to be intrusive, but he does keep an eye on and has to tell her from time to time, hey, you know, I noticed you got this from Jack Jones kind of, you need to block that. I'm going to block it for you. So just, you got to help them. I have recently a client that actually got ripped off and is actually in court trying to get the money back. And so the bank and her are actually going after the person. It was a contractor. Yeah, there's a lot on that. That could be a whole training unto itself, and it is.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So
And you can also, yeah, you can block your telephone as well.
Yeah. You can block the telephone. AARP has trainings on it. You could easily look that up. And I'm going to have stuff in Generations, which I'm doing now, that you can look up easily too. And yeah, on and on.
All right, the next question is, it was stated that home care workers' wages are low. Can you tell me what the average hourly is for private home care workers?
$13 to $15 an hour is the average. So if you're doing personal care, we were paying $13 an hour. If you're doing companion care, we were paying $15 an hour. If somebody's more on the nursing level, then it gets a lot higher, of course. So it's minimum wage pretty much. A lot of places are just minimum wage, flat minimum wage, nothing else. Yeah.
Okay. Regarding the phone scams, you should be able to block the incoming calls from strange numbers. The AARP has lots of on scams, and you don't have to be a member to get a lot of information. But also, you can set up a two-payer system for all money going out. So if your Kapuna has access to the money to spend on these scams, then maybe making it a two-party system would take care of that problem. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's all of the questions for now. Dr. Perkins, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation with lots of information. You guys, if you have any other questions, you can call me anytime. We appreciate you being here. I love having company in my house every Saturday morning for an hour and a half or so. It's good to see everybody, and I hope to see you next week. Call if you have any questions or email me. I also have a caregiver support group this coming Monday evening at 6:30 to 8. If you want to be part of the caregiver support group, please email me and I'll add you to the Zoom list, okay? It is a Zoom meeting, by the way, but yeah, let me know if you want to be part of that. So thank you so much for being here. Dr. Perkinson, thank you again so much. That was wonderful.
Oh, and thank you for all the questions. I really appreciate the attention that you paid to this.
It was good information. And Rick, thank you for your input as well.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm glad I could join you, and it was great. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
All right. You all take care, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you so
you
much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, take care, guys.
Bye-bye.